Hi there, Ken Goodevans here with Digging for Scriptural Gems. We've been studying the book of 1 Kings in the Old Testament. The king known for his wisdom, King Solomon, has just spent 20 years building first the temple that his father David had wanted to build but wasn't allowed to by God, and then his own palace. The temple was duly consecrated and a big feast with appropriate sacrifices was held. God once again reminded the people that his promise to them had their obedience, especially with respect to staying away from other gods and idols, as a condition. God would be with them, God would bless them, but the condition was worship only me. We pick up the story from there today, studying 1 Kings chapter 9, verses 10 to 14. You will remember, as verse 11 reminds us, that Hiram, the king of Tyre, had supplied Solomon with cedar and cypress timber as well as gold, in accordance with what Solomon had asked for. And it was time for Solomon to pay Hiram back. Our text tells us that Solomon gave Hiram 20 cities in the land of Galilee. Of course, Hiram makes a little trip to see these cities, comes down from Tyre to see these cities which Solomon had given him, and we are told, quote, they did not please him. Now, so far, we understand the story, but then it seems to get a little weird for us. Verse 13 tells us that Hiram asked Solomon, what are these cities which you have given me, brother? Now, we don't get Solomon's answer to that question, but we are told the cities were then called, especially by Hiram, Kabul, and remained so to the point of time when 1 Kings was written. Now, the New American Standard Bible, their notes translate this phrase, Kabul, to mean as good as nothing, and implies that it was Hiram who called them that. And then comes verse 14, our last verse today, which surprisingly tells us that Hiram then sent to Solomon 120 talents of gold, which translates, according to the New American Standard Bible, to about $691.2 million US dollars more recently. Now, some suggest that was equivalent to about 9,000 pounds of gold. We can well ask whether this was a reference to the gold that Hiram had sent during the building of the temple and the palace, or was this an additional amount of gold sent at this point in the story? Well, we're going to dig a little deeper and try and find out, although perhaps not conclusively. The NAT translates verse 14 as, quote, Hiram had sent in the past to the king 120 talents of gold, as if it was just telling us that here's the background. Hiram had already sent 120 talents of gold along with the cedar and the other timber. If we accept that, it implies this was the size of the debt that Solomon felt he had towards Hiram with respect to the gold he had received earlier when he asked for it. By the way, Chuck Smith says it was only 60 talents. But still, the story's subplot involving the repayment for Hiram's services seems to end there. But let's dig deeper. Chuck Smith suggests that these 20 cities were basically a thank you gift to Hiram for the help he had provided to Solomon. Now, no one exactly knows why Hiram didn't like these cities, as some commentators felt they were beautifully situated with lots of potential land for agricultural use. David Gusick says what Solomon did by giving Hiram these 20 cities was not a good thing. Now, granted, Hiram was indeed a friend to both David and Solomon and his son Solomon, but the land of Israel had been given to Israel by divine decree, and it was intended only for the Israelites. Trading Israel's land for a glorious temple and palace was not a good deal. What we may have here is one king trying to get the better of the other king in a trade deal. Which one was the better negotiator? Gusick suggests the gold in verse 14 was in fact new gold, which Hiram gave to Solomon for the 20 so-called useless cities. Even though he was displeased with the trade, Hiram went ahead with it in good humor and sent Solomon 120 talents of gold, he says. Robert Jameson gives us a most interesting account on both the cities and the gold mentioned in this passage. Here's what he says, quote, "The gold, however, as others think, may have been the amount of forfeits paid to Solomon by Hiram for not being able to answer, now get this, the riddles and sayings with which, according to Josephus, the historian of the time, in their private correspondence, the two sovereigns amused themselves with. Hiram having refused these cities, probably on account of their inland situation, making them unsuitable to his maritime and commercial people, Solomon satisfied his ally in some other way. And taking these cities into his own hands, he first repaired their shattered walls, then filled them with a colony of Hebrews, 2 Chronicles chapter 8, verse 2, and that's where the quote ends. Now, who would have known all these things? But as always, sometimes we must look beyond the text to historians to get additional information on the backstory. And the real story out there never really contradicts anything the Bible says. It just adds to it and actually supports what the Bible says. Now, Matthew Henry adds a bit more. He suggests that to keep his part of the bargain for the supplies given to him, all Solomon had to do, as we had learned in our earlier studies, was to provide Hiram's workers with food and drink and lodging, which he had done. So the 20 cities were indeed a gift over and above. Now, it should seem, says Henry, these cities were not allotted to any of the tribes of Israel at the time, for the border of Asher had come up to them, Joshua 19, verse 27, which intimates that it did not include them, but continued in the hands of the natives till Solomon made himself master of them and then made a present of them to Hiram. Henry goes on to say that not being pleased with the cities, Hiram therefore returned them to Solomon. And he says, we find this in 2 Chronicles chapter 8, verse 2, who repaired them and then caused the children of Israel to inhabit them, which intimates that before they did not do so. But when Solomon received back what he had given, no doubt he honorably gave Hiram an equivalent in something else. So thinks Henry. Finally, Henry asks whether Hiram was acting in a proud manner and rejected the lands given, or was Solomon being mean in giving Hiram those particular lands? Henry himself lands on the idea that neither was the case, but rather in those days kings were most familiar with the kind of land they already had and didn't really want to venture into thinking about other kinds of land. Hiram wasn't meant to oversee farmland, and Solomon didn't realize that this would have been a stumbling block to the gift. So, what are we to make of this passage as guidance for our own lives? For starters, it gives us some historical background to the dealings of Solomon and Hiram. We need to know that because it helps us understand what we will study next, the trade partnerships that Solomon entered in. It also describes the relationship between Solomon and King Hiram, who was also, at one point or another, his father-in-law. So maybe we are meant to learn that relationships, including those with our in-laws, are very important and that we need to be fair in them. But with all that, we must not give away things God has given us to keep for ourselves. First, those we give them to may not like them, or they may not be enough, and certainly God wouldn't want us to. Now, as I'm reviewing this, I'm thinking, well, isn't that perhaps what might be the problem with the situation with Israel right now? Is God upset at them for giving away so much of the land that he gave them? Through various deals over the years, through a lot of pressure even now from the U.S. and others, they've been given away land and backing up till Israel is much smaller than what God had originally given them. Maybe that's why they're having such a hard time right now. I don't know. I'll let you think about that. Next time we'll see how the Canaanites were enslaved as workers for Solomon's projects. Join us for that. In the meantime, I hope you get a chance. If you like what you're hearing and what you're reading, click the like button on the page. That'll help us a lot, and it'll tell the social media people that, hey, there are people watching this and they like it. Or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just put in YouTube and then put in Digging for Scriptural Gems and subscribe. Thank you to those that are doing that. But above all, please get into the Word. Please get into the Word regularly, preferably daily. I think you'll be really blessed. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.